Hey, what's going on guys, Khrase here, welcome back to another Godfall video, and today we finally get the all-awaited first look at all of the 12 Valor Plates in Godfall, as well as each and every single one of their respective abilities. Of course, as you may or may not know, this is something that you will unlock through crafting as you progress through the game, and each one of these Valor Plates will provide some different effects that will help you in combat, and even more so their ultimate, the Archon Fury, which is going to be all around the one that you're aiming for. Now, there's a few things that you need to know about these Valor Plates. In some of these situations, you might find Valor Plates that behave in a similar way from a gameplay point of view, and the only difference might be the effect, or let's just say the elemental type of damage that Valor Plate will give you access to. So for example, in the case of the Phoenix, this will give you access to a ton of fire-like effects so that you can set enemies easily on fire. Meanwhile, the Typhon is kind of like the opposite in the sense that it gives you access to ice instead, but otherwise from a gameplay point of view they kind of behave quite similarly. So with that out of the way, let's jump right into it, and as always, if you enjoyed this video at any point, also don't forget to leave a thumbs up on it. So let's begin with the first one, which is gonna be the Silver Main. As I've said in the previous video before we had all of this information, this is going to be the starting Valor Plate that also gives you access to a ton of cooldown reduction towards your abilities. First of all, it gives you a flat out bonus of 10% to charge speed for your weapon techniques, your shield abilities, as well as your polarity attacks, which means that you can cast these a lot more often. In terms of its Archon Fury, you can call forth 3 spirit warriors that will aid you in battle, but during that effect you also get the following bonuses. The first one is a further 300% increased charge speed towards the same weapon techniques, shield abilities, and of course those polarity attacks, and a final 30% damage whenever you defeat an enemy with these weapon techniques, shield abilities, or polarity attacks. The next Valor Plate is going to be the Mesa. This is the poison type of Valor Plate that you can get in the game. It comes with a 10% flat out chance to inflict poison with your attacks, but with Archon Fury you're going to increase that to over 100%, and also 100% damage to poisoned enemies. So while enemies are poisoned, you're going to deal pretty much double damage onto them. And finally, it converts your attacks to deal earth damage instead. And by the way, you're going to see this really often with the Archon Fury. Many of these Valor Plates will have a similar Archon Fury that unleashes a shockwave that deals a certain type of elemental damage. In this case it's earth, but in other cases it could be something like air, for example, or fire, as you will come to find out really soon. Now, a next one that I was really curious of and we didn't have a lot of information on was the Hinterclaw, and this right here is going to be the crit chance kind of like Valor Plate if you want to buff up that to insane levels. So this kind of changed a little bit from how the game was before release. First of all, it comes with a 5% critical hit chance by default, but during the Archon Fury, which in this case also unleashes 3 spirit warriors, you're going to get the following effects. First of all, a 30% critical hit chance, and then another 15% critical hit damage whenever you defeat an enemy, up to a maximum stack of 150%. So a really great one if you probably combine it with the dual blades and whatnot. Now moving on to the third one, this is Illumina, and this is something that we haven't seen up until now, well, with the exception of just hearing about it, but this is gonna be the Valor Plate specifically aimed towards weak point damage. So 50% weak point damage by default, and by the way, weak points are going to be visible on these enemies when you expose them, so you're going to have to kind of aim your reticle as you deal damage with the weapons onto them. It's kind of hard to explain, but it's more easy when you're there and play it rather than me explaining it to you. Nonetheless, the Archon Fury is again a shockwave ability that deals 7 physical damage and will reveal the enemy weak point, and it will continue to emit the shockwave every 7 seconds during the Archon Fury that will again deal that 7 physical damage and reveal the enemy's weak point. But on top of that, you also get that nice 40% weak point damage bonus, and of course the other 40% weak point damage whenever you perform a death blow. So this is going to make it much easier for you to just take down enemies way quicker. The next one is going to be the Aegis Horn. As I've said previously, this is kind of like your tank slash support kind of class. It already gives you a 5% damage reduction by default, but it also gives you access to an additional damage reduction for the rest of your teammates. So basically, when you activate your Archon Fury, you're going going to again call forth 3 spirit warriors that will help you in battle, but during that effect you and all nearby allies will take 30% less damage, and whenever you are hit you will also shoot 3 projectiles that deal 149 physical damage to nearby enemies. By the way, these numbers that you're reading right here, like 149, might seem small, or like the 7 physical damage that we saw previously, they seem small, but these will scale up as you progress, as you get better gear, and as you like upgrade your Aegis Horn with all of those augments and whatnot. So I'm going to cover that in the video once the game releases. Moving on to the 6th one, we have a brand new Valor plate that we also haven't seen before, called the Mobius. Looks really cool. This is gonna be all about applying curses to the enemies, curse being of course another type of elemental in the game. So in this case you get a flat 10% chance to inflict that with your attacks, and your Archon Fury will summon 3 Void Sentinels instead. But during that Archon Fury your chance to inflict curse increases by another 90%, and then you get another 100% damage to enemies under the effect of curse, and finally your attacks will deal void damage instead, so it gets converted to that. But this is why I said that many of these Valor plates might feel similar to one another. Like Mobius, if you were to compare it for example with the Mesa previously, it's kind of like the same, but instead of applying poison, this time around it applies curses, though it remains to be seen how much of a difference there is between poison and curse damage in the final game, especially in the end game. But since we are on the subject of functionalities that look similar, let's go over the ones that also share similar functionalities. So Vertigo was another one. This is the one Valor plate that applies shock damage, and basically a 10% chance to inflict shock. As you can see, it functions very similarly to the previous ones, as in you unleash a shockwave, deal 30 air damage, but during that Archon Fury you get your attacks to be converted to air damage. Your chance to inflict shock is increased by another 90%, and your damage against shocked enemies is increased by 100% too. And it goes pretty similar for example with the Typhon as well. The Typhon is kind of like the opposite of Phoenix, except in this case you apply that chill damage or a chill effect onto the enemies, which also slows them down. You're gonna be able to also summon 3 Water Sentinels instead of the Spirit Sentinels or the Void Sentinels that you usually get with the other ones, but functionality wise it's kind of all pretty much the same. I think that the only new one that we haven't seen before is the Bulwark. This is going to be again similar to the previous ones, except in this case it inflicts bleed damage, so enemies bleed over time for a lot more. Of course you can summon 3 physical sentinels this time around, but in terms of Archon Fury bonuses they are all pretty much the same, except they apply to the bleed effects and so on and so forth. Oh, and here's another look at the Phoenix, by the way, at the screen itself, also something that you can unlock quite early on in the game. Again, it's all about igniting the enemies, but the chances on them are very similar to the previous ones. With the Bulwark, with the Typhon, with the Vertigo, you get a 10% flat out chance to inflict that elemental damage, and then during the Archon Fury you set enemies on fire and also convert your regular damage into that particular elemental, which in this case is fire. Moving on to number 11, we have the Greyhawk, which is fully specialized on soul shattering enemies. This is something that I will explain in just a little bit, but you get a flat out 10% build up bonus to that, and the Archon Fury is basically another shockwave ability that applies 30 build up to nearby enemies. But during the Archon Fury you will get another 100% bonus to the soul shatter build up, and then every time you soul shatter an enemy you will unleash another shockwave that applies 30 more onto the other enemies that might be nearby. Now, what is soul shatter, you might be wondering? Well, basically think of it this way: it's kind of like building up damage and then releasing it onto the enemy so that you can kill it way faster. Like for example, when you will get to play the game, which is something that I can show you right now, when you will get to play it, if you use like light attacks against the enemy with the R1 on the controller, you're going to build a white bar over their health bar. So even though you might have not taken down their HP yet, the build up will still continue. So once it fully fills, for example, their HP bar, you can unleash that soul shatter build up with of course a heavy attack with the R2, and this is going to take the entire health bar if you like fully build it up with the soul shatter. It's kind of hard to explain until we get the game, but again, it's just a few more hours away, so it's not gonna be that long of a wait. Now this brings us of course to the final one, which is going to be the Armistice. We finally get all of the full details on it as well. This is kind of like similar to that, but instead of soul shatter in this case you will have a lot of breach damage bonus. Now breach damage, as I've said previously, is basically stagger. You're going to be able to stagger enemies much easier, which in turn means you're going to be able to stun them and also expose their health to a lot of incoming damage. In this case, you have a permanent 10% breach damage bonus, and the Archon Fury is going to be another shockwave ability that breaches all enemies nearby but only deal 1 physical damage. You don't really care about that since breach is the one that is important here, since you don't have to worry about their breach bars anymore. But this is it with all of the 12 Valor Plates in the game as well as their bonuses. Of course, I'm gonna make a ranking when the game comes out, but in the meantime, this is it. As always, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to comment, like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one.